All right, well, it's 10:31. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending the third meeting for the DelDOT's Advanced Air Mobility Feasibility Study. This is the Advisory Committee Stakeholder Group, Review Group, whatever you want to call it. Our third meeting. This meeting will focus on policy implementation. So our first two meetings talked a bit about, just existing conditions, things of that nature, and now we're moving towards wrapping up and providing a roadmap for moving forward. So I will turn it over to Randall Wiedemann with R.A. Wiedemann, who has been leading the study, and he will provide the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Austin. Let me just see if I can move. Oh, there we go. Yes, today we're going to sort of talk about, we're getting into the wrap-up phases of the study, and we wanted to talk about what it is that the state can do, in terms of policy and funding, talk a little bit about the vertiport location criteria, workforce development, and some on the implementation phases. So to start with the policy and funding initiatives, there's really two sources, that main sources, and that's going to be the federal or the state. And so in looking at the regulatory framework, our statewide standards for vertiports would be developed in the system plan that the FAA is funding. We would align, with their guidelines. And, when we start talking about streamlining permitting, that is for AAM projects, that's actually going to apply more to the electrical grid than it will be to the vertiport processes themselves. We're going to recommend land use compatibility measures. Again, that's going to come out of the system plan. Let me just make sure we didn't skip anything. Okay. The grid enhancement, for vertiports in particular, the microgrid concept is probably going to involve solar panels. There's also other, more major things that need to be done. And of course, AAM is a real small part of the total electric grid requirements that are needed. So, we're just a little piece of this. They're going to still have to do all of this expansion, whether AAM develops in the state or not, just because of the EV, electric vehicles, are, the growth in those. We put down some of the partnerships, PJM interconnection. That used to stand for Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland, but it's just PJM. They're the regional grid coordination outfit, and there are others that we would want to have in on our discussion. In terms of the funding mechanisms, as I mentioned, there's federal grants, there's state grants, but I doubt if state issued bonds are going to be used very much in terms of the AAM, but maybe, some of the power generation, perhaps. Utility-driven surcharges, that's something that's been used in other states where they add surcharges to the bills in order to drive the innovation. Public-private partnerships, basically this helps speed up things and it mitigates risk. There's tax incentives, there's long-term service agreements, and then, if you have a private company that does renewable energy, those are the people that we would be talking with. So just looking at the key recommendations from this phase, we need a roadmap that would, has clear guidelines for the state. So that's something that, there's like one more section after what we're doing right now, and it's really to focus on that roadmap. There's fast track permitting primarily for grid upgrades because the grid is the critical path here. It's going to take longer to get that up and running than anything else. Funding programs, partnerships between government, utilities, and developers. And we believe that this task force or the committee process is the best way to get everybody together in the same room to talk about. And that's one of the reasons that we were, trying to make sure that Captain Charlton was here today, because we believe that going forward, DSU, we'd like to sort of engage them in a leadership role in this. And it's nothing like springing it on him, at the meeting, but that's something that we can talk about when we get into the discussion. The vertiport location criteria that we're going to be looking at is coming from the system plan. Obviously, you want to get close to demand centers. You want to make sure they're environmentally compatible and scalable, for future expansion, that they're flexible to add on to. Where would we go? We're going to look at this again in the system plan, but downtown Wilmington would be, the business hub and multimodal type access. Newark, for UD and other corporate demand. Dover, state capital. DSU's in Cheswold. We've got the Air Force Base potential integration. Then you've got, the beach areas for tourism. You've got, sort of in the latter stages of the planning period, you've got sort of the outer reaches that might need connectivity down in Sussex County, those areas that might be underserved as well. So in terms of workforce development, we're looking at job creation and how that would happen in Delaware with the various skills that are needed. We know that DSU is gearing up for things like this with simulation programs and so forth. And I think those are going to, be a major part of this workforce development. Other Delaware academic institutions, Del Tech and so forth can, be a part of this as well. The economic impact of AAM is really going to be felt in terms of jobs. How many jobs is it going to create? And so when you look at those job opportunities, they go across a lot of different disciplines, manufacturing, infrastructure development, flight ops, energy and infrastructure, charging support. And then there's the programming side of it, the analytics and autonomous systems. And then, of course, the users of these facilities in terms of public service, emergency response roles for groups that would be using, these vertiports to, similar to the hospital heliport type concept, only have these as public use. Education and training, Del State, again, we're looking at their lead on that. There's going to be needs for technical certification programs and partnerships with industry, internships and that type of thing for hands-on training. When we look at the implementation phases for AAM in Delaware, phase 1 is the first 5 years. Think it's important to establish, originally I said permanent AAM task force. Nothing is permanent. So why don't we just say standing AAM task force? And my thinking is, and we'll have to open it up to discussion, but my thinking is that the DSU might be, the better facilitator of that. I mean, we can still at the state, you know, do these types of things, but in terms of having a task force that's hands-on, it could be where DSU could lead that effort. Um, Develop plan for the siting, that's going to come in the system plan. When funding becomes available and you actually want to develop site, vertiports, you're going to need to do site selection studies and engage, public and private stakeholders to make sure that you've got community outreach in doing this. And this is, again, the first 5 years. The second 5 years is when you would actually begin constructing vertiports, prioritizing the high demand locations and upgrading the grid. Um, there might even be some pilot programs in Wilmington or Dover, where we start talking about, um, intra-city transfer or intercity transfer programs, uh, commuters, out-of-state commuters, going into the major, you know, urban areas. And again, this would be more of a national trend that Delaware would pick up on. The last phase, sort of the last 10 years, would be a time when we would be expanding those services to, the outer reaches of Delaware. We'd integrate with the multimodal transportation networks so that you could go smoothly from one to the other. You'd be scaling up the vertiport operations, and through all this, you'd be looking at regulatory compliance, and you would be refining, what you're doing based upon actual operational data. In other words, it would no longer be conceptual. You'd have, real data to go from, and you could adjust the plan, based upon what's actually happening on the ground. So the final thing is in terms of stakeholder engagement. How do we do this? Well, there's probably 5 groups that we would want to engage. Obviously the government portion of it, for the policies and the funding and any regulation that would be needed. Private sector to get the money and innovation, academic institutions. I think this is where the training programs and the simulations are going to become, highly important. We need to talk to the utility providers through all of this and make sure that we're not designing something that they can't do, later on. And then any community outreach that we need to do just to spur the acceptance of advanced air mobility, make sure that it's compatible with the areas it's going into, and sort of gear for its success. Um, let's see if there's other. Yes, I wanted to show like the New Jersey AAM roadmap, and this is what they did. I think Deloitte did this for them, but they put this thing together as to where they're going and how they're going to get there. I think something like this is something that we need to develop as a sort of end product of our discussions here. And if you look at, what they're saying in New Jersey, I mean, they're forecasting 26,000 jobs. They're 152 million in tax revenues and all kinds of things. So, they have a much grander vision than perhaps we have in Delaware, but even a fraction of that would be pretty impressive to have in Delaware. So those are things that we would be wanting to, um, to put together for, this task, this group, this committee, and essentially, that'll be our next section. So I do have, one last slide, and this is sort of the next step, and it is the implementation roadmap. It would be the conclusion of this particular study. We would come to the end of this section of it, and we have to answer where do we go from here? We have a group together, we have interested people. There's some things that are beginning to happen. We need to keep the lines of communication open between different parties. And for that reason, I would suggest a DSU leadership role. And again, as soon as I'm done, we'll open it up to discussion, but I would like to hear from Captain Charlton about that. The support from the AAM community and private industry will be important, along with, the support that the state would give, through system planning that we're going to be doing. And so we'll be, addressing some of these things from a planning standpoint immediately. I mean, we've started the system plan. There'll be incentives, perhaps regulation and funding. So all that being said, let's that's the end of the presentation. So I would like to open it up for discussion and hear, any comments or questions. So let me just do that now. There we go. Everybody seems to be muted. Is CJ available to comment on the DSU role going forward?
Hey Randall, this is Greg Band. I don't know if CJ is joining us today. Thanks again for pulling this together. This is really helpful. One quick
Okay.
question. I see what the output is in this particular case, and you did mention New Jersey, but one of the things that I think about is for Delaware and AAM is what makes us different compared to other states. And that may not have been the remit for this project, but I'm just curious if beyond what you saw at the New Jersey slide that you did you look at what other states are doing from a policy and infuse that into some of the recommendations?
Yeah, we looked, I'm involved in the Massachusetts AAM process as well. In fact, there's a meeting of the task force tomorrow afternoon that I'm attending virtually, but they have a roadmap as well that was I think it was put together by MIT, or it might have been one of the consulting firms up there. But they are very aggressive. They have a state program that has launched you know a lot of unmanned aerial drones, and they use that in their state. They're budgeting for that. They've got a whole group of people who are doing projects and going for grants, federal grants to do exploratory, studies and all of that. And so anyway, so there is a lot of there's a body of work out there that is sort of past, where we are at this point. And because they have funding, they have millions of
Right.
dollars.
That I understand. That I totally understand. And I was just curious if you because
Yeah.
I see other states and I'm very active in the AAM space, so I know other states are more advanced than Delaware is. I'm just happy we're
Yes.
even looking at it,
Yes.
quite frankly. But thank you for answering that. I appreciate it.
Yes. Jim.
Hey.
Yes.
How you doing? Good to see everyone on. Yeah, I've been pretty active with Ohio, and I just contracted with them to develop a AM strategic roadmap for several communities that are pursuing it. But I see Scott's on the line from AUVSI. Maybe Scott, you can address that a little bit, talking about maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what AUVSI is doing with the statewide engagement in AAM. I attended Exponential in San Diego back in April. We had a pretty good discussion, bringing together representatives from the different states to ask questions and kind of collaborate a little bit. But maybe Scott, if you could just talk to that a little bit, what AUVSI is doing in that area.
Yeah, happy to do that. For those not aware, there's the AAM multi-state collaborative, which I think is up to about 28 or so states where Departments of Transportation, Departments of Aviation, Economic Development Corps are working together. Originally, that was an effort that was driven by Ohio and Virginia, but I think the leadership on that side, Tracy Tynan has since retired, as well as was it Tom Tim on the Ohio side. Economic development has retired, but those efforts are still ongoing. I think the plan there was to do some position papers on sort of aviation stakeholder perspective from a state employee version. Yeah, I know Austin, I know y'all have participated. Otherwise, we're working on model legislation that's been picked up in multiple states that mirrors a lot of the things that you're saying here around making sure that you have the right people inside of the appropriate arms of Delaware, like focusing on this and devoting what resources you can to it, as well as setting out sort of legislative baseline for definitions and understanding. And doing this committee and looking to build a roadmap is the kind of things that we've gotten good feedback from our industry members. We're live in Arizona right now. Our bill's actually in committee being heard currently. And then, it's live in California, and we're working on introduction in Texas as well. But, always happy to bring, if you're looking for specific industry feedback into the discussion. We work very closely with a number of the OEMs and those that are working on the infrastructure side as well.
That does sound, really good. And part of I guess one of the questions that I would have is it too late on the OEMs to inject Delaware into the discussion? In other words, are they already set up? Are they already, going to be where they are, or is there some opportunity for Delaware?
It's probably just a question of timing, right? They have their sort of initial launch markets where they, the current business models that they have in view are what make the most sense given population density, given complexity of the airspace, given existing infrastructure and aviation stakeholders, as well as what they think they're going to be able to produce from an aircraft perspective and what FAA is going to be able to handle from a route approval and safety assessment perspective. So
right.
It's just a question of what your timeline is, as well as how that aligns with theirs.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess, in opening it up to discussion in terms of your thoughts on where we go from here, I think it would be important to have people weigh in on that. I've suggested that, because the state doesn't have a good, this is the only mechanism we have as this forum to keep it going. And I think, Austin would agree that the secretary or or at least the planning director might have not heartburn, but just trouble envisioning how this thing becomes a standing committee and who's responsible and who does what. That's why I was hoping that Captain Charlton would have been here today to discuss the DSU role, because I think.
Can you hear us?
What's that?
Can you hear us?
Can you see us?
Can you hear us? You can hear us. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
He's here. Sorry. I didn't
he's
unmute all the way last time. Yep, he's in the room with us.
Oh, okay. Well, then in that case, I would like to hear from Captain Charlton on that suggestion. That's a huge thing.
Yes, can I see us? Good morning.
Hey,
Good
Jim,
morning.
I owe you a phone call and an email back, but we're on the same page. The interesting thing is we were just talking, I was just sharing that yesterday we had the Adjutant General and basically all the principals from the Delaware Air National Guard and Army National Guard down on campus. I think it was the first time that they've ever all been there at the same time to talk. And we talked meat and potatoes as opposed to appetizers. And
Right.
they were very interested in what we were looking to do with our own veil as a foundational piece for feasibility studies that negates us having to get into paying for the infrastructure and the operational side off the bat, doing it in a virtual environment. So as I was looking at everything that you said, that you presented in the presentation, I see lots of opportunities. And I can tell you, based upon my little bit of familiarity with Del State coming up to this point, the questions that would come are, we're already going to build the veil in 3 phases. Our phase 2 and our phase 3 were the expansion, kind of what you were talking about, the implementation and stuff. And that's where that's where I can envision this collaboration becoming the standing committee and stuff like that. And then going on to define what it is we're trying to do. So to be more specific, I would say that I would think that for the school's perspective, they would want to make sure that not only this body, but the state of Delaware through the Department of Transportation, DAAC, is willing to join them in pursuing and applying for funding for not only our funding for these research groups, exploratory groups, but also after we define what it is we want to do. It's a much better prospect if we go collectively together, i.e. DSU is the lead, but in collaboration with the Department of Transportation, the Aviation Advisory Council, and having a metered approach in terms of what it is we're trying to do. Yes. Because as I articulated when I was first here, I didn't envision us doing the operational side because, you've got DEMA and everything else going on. But we talked about this whole thing is about a need to have a unified approach going forward. We were trying to be the platform to facilitate everybody else being able to test what they want to do. But in listening to what you're saying, this also presents the opportunity. Delaware State just reached R2 status last week. And it turns out that out of the 114 HBCUs in the country, only one has R1 status, and they just got it like 2 or 3 months ago. And we're one of only 5 additional ones that got R2 status. So this presents a great opportunity for the school and the state as a whole to elevate our ability to collaborate, to collect research dollars, to do extended studies and implementation, with the caveat that right now we all know everything is in chaos in Washington. So we'll just have to wait for that to settle down. But I can tell you in the strategic plan that I was putting forward, where we applied for the aviation workforce development grants from the FAA, this year our submission was for a merit-based graduated investment pre-college screening program for students from the state of Delaware to get exposure to flying, students that were already inbound to our aviation program, with the goal of integrating their utilization of technology, of which this veil was going to be a significant portion of it, as well as educating them before they come in. Our next phase, which could also contribute to the veil, was that we were going to grow Del States into a maintenance apprenticeship shop, because we have the 2nd largest fleet of airplanes in the state, but providing an opportunity for Delaware Tech and Polytech, as well as the Guard and Reserves, to send all their people to apprentice. The reason why I'm bringing it up is because when you talk about opportunities for maintenance and stuff like that, we can theoretically go to the state of Delaware and demonstrate not only our desire to do this, but also sharing that we're incorporating the AAM into things that we already want to do that are specifically targeting workforce development for the state that you would already do. You would already support the apprentice program to provide an opportunity for high school and college students to get the hours they need to reach their certification requirements for A&P. You were already going to support our program to bring in more students to learn how to fly. We're just loading the AAM into it and bringing DEMA and all the other faculties into it as partners, saying that this will also provide the foundation for us to grow in our funding in terms of what we go after. Because ultimately, what I envision all of you saying is we want to define what AAM looks like in the state of Delaware in terms of what we service and what we do. So
Yes.
when do we bring Amazon to the table? You know, the Air National Guard and the Army are already there, but they want to take advantage of our veil. They haven't, you know, I know the Air Force was talking about where they're already spending money on AAM research, but I don't really know too much about it. But the point is, as an institution, we can be a very powerful lobbying point for research dollars, as well as central point for collaboration. Coming out of this, the best thing is to come to DSU and have a sit down with our president and our board of trustees to articulate what the vision is and come forth with some type of plan that initially isn't pie in the sky in terms of meteoric funding, but something that's very feasible and scalable, which is what was also in that presentation. And that's why I think the veil is a very good starting point, because it also allows us to be, because it's server-based, it would also allow us to establish facilities in Newcastle County, down in Sussex County, so that when we're doing our feasibility studies in the virtual environment, we can say, well, this is what it would be like for an eVTOL or an AM to go from Newcastle International, you know, Newcastle County down to Delaware Air Park or down to Delaware Coastal with miles and airspace and airways and stuff, and then turn around and say, with Amazon, this is what it would be like for last mile delivery from your facility in Wilmington or Newcastle down to a location here, whether it's Delaware State or something else. But those would be the things that I would say that if we were going to come together and do that, if you come to the table saying we want to be not only as partner, but a stakeholder and a collaborative appeal to the state legislature for both federal, state, and private funding, I can see that happening. Anything short of that, it would still leave us at our go at it by ourselves. Hey, we're going to build our thing. We're going to go to phase 2. And phase 2 is going to, once again, build out for what we're doing, but it doesn't necessarily entail the state. But I think that trying to bring everybody on board for phase 2 and phase 3, which is in line with what you're talking about with after enable, the accelerate, and was the after accelerate, whatever the phase was after accelerate, the 3-point New Jersey roadmap. That's where I can see this really happening, and the funding being a big part, because anytime that we can collectively go to our state and federal representation with collaborative plans to make something happen, it increases our chances of getting that funding, even if it's just to do testing and feasibility.
No, I completely agree. And I think that, you know, the state, you know, could partner with DSU, and, you know, we would, you know, there'd be clear lines here where we would be trying for the funding, you know, we'd be helping with the funding, and, but, you know, because you are sort of, there's line and there's staff, you know, and you guys are sort of the line, because you're actually producing pilots, you're producing, you know, you might be producing later mechanics, you might be producing AAM technicians, certified people. If you're doing simulations, if you're setting up things for different businesses, the point is, you know, that platform could be expanded through some sort of a standing group that actually invited all these different groups to collaborate. And, you know, we wouldn't leave everything to, you know, you wouldn't have to do it all. But at the same time, I think that given the fact that you're in the marketplace, you are doing workforce development, there's action going on your side, regardless of whether this committee, you know, goes forward or not, that it's a natural place to land, you know, once we're done with our, you know, sort of academic exercise that we're doing here in researching, you know, where all this stuff is going. I think the action steps and the funding and all the other things that come on would basically have traction if the state and DSU were sort of, DelDOT and DSU were partnered on a process like this.
Any other
Any other
thoughts?
any thoughts about that from anybody else on the call here?
Don't let Jim Herrera talk. He dragged me into this.
No, thanks. I think, you're talking about a public-private partnership, right? And in terms of funding, the National Science Foundation has a regional innovation grant. Matter of fact, it just closed out in February 11th, but they do have other opportunities that could be leveraged, putting together a collection of private industry partners within Delaware businesses, as well as academic institutions, and pursuing a regional innovation grant. Scott, do you know anything about that in terms of, I know Virginia was pursuing that because I was working with the Virginia team for a bit of time, but the National Science Foundation Regional Innovation Grant, it's a pretty significant grant. I mean, it starts around, I think, 15 million or so. That's the award floor, but it goes up from there over a 10-year period of time to help states get activities like this going through private-public partnerships. So something, those things are out there. They could be leveraged. It's going to take some coordination, and I think Randall, you're spot on. I think Del State is well postured to assume a leadership role in this if they have the bandwidth and they're willing to. They are, CJ. But I think that's great to leverage Del State. Because they have a lot of the existing infrastructure from workforce development as well as education. So the other thing that I would hit on a little bit more, because this is something that I actually really dive deep into, and that was the community integration, community acceptance piece. I was awarded a NASA SBIR, Small Business Innovation Research, to develop an electronic community AAM toolkit. So I developed this toolkit to help. Traditionally in industry, there's been this top-down driven approach, right? Where if you build it, they will come, and industry obviously is pursuing their goals of making money and turning profit and all that good stuff. But what I did within the state of Ohio, for example, was we cultivated this grassroots effort from the ground up. We brought together the stakeholders, kind of like what we're doing here, right? So bring together those stakeholders. And then we talk about no two communities are exactly the same, right? So, there's a saying out there, if you've seen one community, AM community, you've seen one AM community. All because there's no two exactly alike, and you have to cultivate that community acceptance from the ground up. Part of that involves engaging local leadership, elected officials, because let's face it, if things go sideways, which in aviation, as we know, things can sometimes do that, as we've seen in the news lately, quite often it's the elected officials that are going to be answering the mail. So they're going to have to be on board with this. And so, we had targeted education materials for elected officials, economic development folks. So there's different economic development corporations out there. And then for like airport directors, what is AAM? What's the impact on you? So it has to be cultivated from the ground up. And we took like an engineering, a model-based systems engineering approach to this. So we started with the concept of operations to show the unique operating environment for that area, right? We explored different operational vignettes. So you would say, okay, if we're going to have an aircraft flying tourists, say from Wilmington down to the beach, what would that look like? What would a notional route structure look like? And when we start talking about route structures, more than just drawing a line on the map, any kind of change to the NAS, it involves route structure. You got to have the NEPA compliance there from the FAA perspective. So there's a lot of things that go into it. there's been a lot of focus on the aircraft itself, but there's another part of the infrastructure that needs to be built up, and that would be the CNS infrastructure to support these types of operations. If AAM is going to scale to that vision, that notional vision that we think about in the future, you're going to have the air traffic management systems to accommodate those operations. For example, in an urban environment, some of these OEMs envision aircraft taking off and landing from a vertiport every 30 seconds. So with that kind of, right now, the FAA is still struggling to determine what's the minimum safe separation standards for some of these aircraft. Right now, with lack of these standards, they're going to have to apply traditional aircraft aviation standards to this, right? And that's just not going to work from a scalability perspective for industry. So there has to be automation in there. The notional air traffic management systems that are UTM inspired to accommodate these operations. So there's a lot to this that's going to require a build up to get to that pie in the sky vision of aircraft, flying passengers around. To where it's ubiquitous, right? Where you don't even think about it. The other thing I would mention is there are efforts going on adjacent. Randall, you mentioned New Jersey, but there is University of Maryland's Chesapeake Bay UAS route network that they were working on. And when you look at their notional route network, Delaware is kind of a black hole. You don't see any routes going into Delaware. You see some going to Ocean City and other places, Wallops Island, but this is something that we could leverage as well because there are adjacent activities going on. Virginia, like I said, Virginia is leaning heavily into this. I've reached out to the PM down at Wallops Island. Hey, is there a desire to do this? And of course there is, right? They want to develop a center of excellence or research center there for AAM, and that's right here on the peninsula. It's just down the road, right? So these are some other activities that we just need to open up the aperture and look at and see what's out there and see what other states are doing too. North Texas has a group that meets monthly, sometimes twice monthly. I found it to be very valuable. I think it's the North Texas UAS. Help me out, Scott. What was it? The
North Central Texas Council of Governments, NCT-COG. Ernest Huffman, if you know him.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Ernest put together a group. We're talking about 50 to 60 communities. And what's unique about this is each community has their own little vision of how they envision using AAM. And they're all in a little bit of competition with each other, but it's really neat to see this hive of activity focused on AAM. So that's open to the public. If Ernest Huffman is his name, you can reach out to him. He'll add you to the invitation list, and just a lot of good, useful information. And they also invite folks in from industry, because with this, it's not just the OEMs or the aircraft. There's a lot of spin-offs coming from this. So you got people who are focusing on, for example, training curriculum, academic curriculum, just a multitude of it. So think of this as an ecosystem. It's not just the electric aircraft. It is a whole ecosystem that's going to have to be cultivated and built from the ground up.
That's really good, Jim. And I would mention that in Texas, when they send out an RFP for any kind of airport work all through the state, one of the things on the list, and it might have, update airport layout plan, do this, that, and the other thing. And then one of the final things is include advanced air mobility planning into, whatever design that you're doing. In other words, they're trying to future-proof the designs now so that, they don't run into, if we'd only included this, we'd have saved, X number of $1 million. So those are things that, can be incorporated into what we're doing in Delaware. Certainly, if we talk about, airport development or vertiport development, the system plan that we're initiating now could incorporate those kinds of planning guidelines, so that we don't miss the opportunity to integrate these facilities before they're, you've already painted yourself in a corner. So that, I think that's good. Scott, did you, Jim asked a question, but never got to it about, whether you'd heard of this funding or there, other type funding.
I hadn't heard of that one in particular, but I'm happy to point or connect y'all to Aaron Sykes from NSF. I've talked to him before about some of the technical and training programs that they have in place on the educational side, but then also on the grants. That's kind of the best contact that I know of. And if it's not him, he's got a good team that he can point us to. Does that sound about right, Jim? Okay.
That's good. Okay, excellent. I mean, these are the kinds of collaborations that we need to, going forward as well. I think what we're gonna try to do is we've got a system plan that has a vertiport component into it. And so what we're going to do is we're going to, focus on what is required in Delaware in terms of the vertiport process, sort of a, planning stage, but that will input this roadmap that we're going to be, constructing for this final, session that we have. What I would like is, for any of you, Jim or Scott or Greg, anybody else, Troy, that want to, or Matthew or Jason, whoever wants to send information in, if you would send it to Austin as to what, your thoughts about this roadmap, if there's some particular thing that you think it ought to be there, it doesn't have to be it could be a whole bunch of things, but I would very much like to get a collaboration of input before we put this final thing together. We should not be just doing this in a vacuum. We need all of your input so that, when we do move to these next steps, and, if there's a collaboration with DSU on moving forward, then, we'll have that roadmap and we can share that vision. And I think there's definitely a place for, the job simulations and all the things that Captain Charlton is doing, all of that incorporated with the investment of public-private partnerships and other sort of areas of funding that we could actually start making concrete progress, we move from the planning to the implementation. And so that would be, that's my hope moving forward. Other comments about that? Okay, here comes Austin.
In dovetailing in what you said, I think a critical next step should be us either scheduling for them to come to the next meeting or scheduling a delegation to go to Delaware State in the next 30 to 45 days to sit down with leadership of the university, from President Allen and all the people, possibly some people from the Board of Trustees, to make a presentation about this and how it is envisioned for DSU to be a lead and where everybody else will play into it. Because it's same thing is applicable. I can go in and say everything that I want, but I'm not this collective body. When the collective body can come down and say, this is a direction that the state is looking to go already, and you guys are already going into a certain arena, it's a natural collaboration to look at this from a bigger perspective. Because the other thing I wanted to say that may sound facetious is, because of the way that we're going about it in terms of making it an enhancement to training that already exists, even if our prospects fall flat on its face for the long term, the investments that we would make in smaller incrementals would not go in vain. So it's almost like a win-win. You know,
Right.
even if we did nothing else, we will have we will have a station up north and a station down south. And even if they don't go to do the funding, we can still take the opportunity to collaborate with DEMA or somebody else and say, hey, when we build this vertiport or when we build it down there, here's a place for you to, you know, the stage and plan, do emergency response down there to stage out of. You know, there's really no drawback from the vantage point that we're approaching it, because we're not trying to get in it to be the operator.
Right.
Everything we're trying to do as far as infrastructure is all and support is already stuff that we need to do, and it would integrate with the initiatives that we already have on the plates.
Okay. What about this? What if, and you know, just looking forward, what if CJ, you and I and, you know, Austin, you know, have a private meeting or you know, whatever, just to kind of sort out which way we're going, you know, and plan for this other meeting, and also get kind of, you know, do some brainstorming as to what programs could actually influence the AAM development, and not just AAM, but all of aviation. You know, I mean, we you know tend to cubbyhole these things, but they are interrelated, and you know, get, you know, I mean, I apologize for springing this on you right here, but it did just sort of, it came to me, you know, more recently that DSU is a logical extension of this process. And so anyway, I think it would be good for us to get our ducks in a row. Then, you know, we could set up this bigger meeting with you know, the Board of Regents or whoever it is that we're talking to there, and have a plan for what this is going to look like. And it may be that, you know, we have a draft of the roadmap before we go in and say, look, you know, this is what the roadmap looks like. And here's where, you know, we see your involvement, boom, 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 here and here and here. And then, you know, it would seem a little more than just pie in the sky. It would be like, this is a plan that actually, you know, we think you could, you know, benefit from, and also, you know, be a win-win on everybody's part. Does that make sense?
I'm open to that.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll work it out in the next, you know, few weeks to maybe just sit down virtually and talk it out, and you know, have a good plan for, you know, moving forward, and then involve this bigger group in whoever's interested or whatever, if there is a sit down meeting, you know, being there. And because I think it would be important to go in person to be there. And so you know, whoever would want to be a part of that, I think would, you know, it would be awesome to get your help with that. And in the meanwhile, if I can get, like I said, everybody to send their comments and ideas about this implementation process to Austin, that's going to help us tremendously putting all this stuff together. Okay. Anything else? Well, thank everybody for being here. This was very helpful, and I do appreciate all of your input. And again, still looking for it. So we'll reconvene probably in a few months, and look at the roadmap and where we go from there. All right.
Thank you all so much.
All right.
Thanks all.
Thank you all very much.